Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Chester City Hall, and for those of you not from Chester, welcome to Chester. My name is Stefan Roots. I'm the mayor of Chester. I'm here to say hello and introduce our speaker. Fortunately, somebody prepares notes for me, so if you see me reading, it's because I'm reading. All right, so it starts with a good evening and welcome to another lecture in my mayor's lecture series. This is something we started just a couple months ago. Once a month, we're bringing in a featured speaker to talk about a topic that I think is of interest. If you don't think it's of interest, it doesn't matter because it's all about what I want to learn. But what we're learning is the seats are never empty, so we're hitting it right on the mark. This one's a little different. We've been, I guess I committed to once a month, but if something comes up in the middle of the month, like this one did, someone's in town, they're available, we can just crank it up for you. So I'm really excited to slide this one in between our last two. If you want to view any of the former lectures that we've had, you can go to our website, which is chestercity.com, and you will search mayor's lectures in the search box, and they're all on display there. And for those of you who are viewing live, good evening to you too. I started hosting this series to hear from experts on relevant topics, increasing our learning and get informed dialogue going. In the next hour or so, we'll hear a lecture and then have time for questions and answers and discussions. At the end of the lecture, there'll be an award presented. It's the first time we've had that happen by the Heritage Commission of Delaware County. Thank you, Heritage Commission of Delaware County, for using this opportunity to present an award. Chester's Underground Railroad. Who would have thought that we have Amtrak and SEPTA, Conrail, CSX, and an underground railroad right here in town? Some of you may know that Delaware County has recognized the month of September as International Underground Railroad Month. So tonight, this topic brings that really local to the city of Chester, Yusef Miller. Many of you seem to know Yusef. There he is right there. He's going to be the next to speak after me. He'll be presenting the Underground Railroad to and through the city of Chester, PA. He was born and raised right here in Chester. After graduating from Chester High School in 1987, he enlisted in the United States Navy as a hospital corpsman, combat medic with service in Iran and Afghanistan. He retired in 2011 as a chief petty officer after 24 years. 24 years of active duty. Becoming one of the only places you could work somewhere for that long and not be moved. He currently lives in San Diego County, California, and we're lucky to be able to have him present tonight before heading back to the West Coast. He's been studying this subject, the Underground Railroad in Chester, for over a dozen years using the Delaware County Historical Society archives, Quaker archives, and surrounding area sources. His research, from which he will be presenting tonight, is called Missing Pieces, Rediscovering the Underground Railroad in the City of Chester. Before I welcome him up, I'm going to give you a little story about Underground Railroad in Delaware County. I went to visit our artist community sets up shop right behind me on the Avenue of the States, and one night one of the guys says, "Hey, I want you to ride with me. I'm going to deliver a piece of art out to Rose Valley." I said, "Okay." So we hopped in the car, and if you know Rose Valley, sometimes it's a little tough, especially as it starts to get dark, to find addresses because the houses are kind of off the road, and some driveways have 3 and 4 addresses, you know, once you go in the little driveway and then it opens up. And that was the case here. So we're going down Rose Valley, up Rose Valley Road, back and forth. And finally, we almost gave up, and we finally found the address. We sneak through, we get to the house. The wife was there, but she says, "Please wait, my husband will be on his way home shortly." I mean, it wasn't an uncomfortable wait, but 45 minutes later, he comes. We spend about 15 minutes with him, and it's time to leave. And I have to admit, the whole time I was in that house, which was a nice house, there was something. I felt something. I didn't know what it was. And as we were walking out in the foyer area, I asked about the house itself. I was like, "How old is this house?" And the wife says, "Well, there's really 2 parts to the house. There's this part, which is the original part, and it dates back to the 1800s. There was a fire. They added on this part." And then she said this: "This house was part of the Underground Railroad. Do you want to see it?" And it really shut me down right now because there was a part of me that wanted to say yes, and there was a part of me that just didn't know what to say. So she just dragged me along. So kind of imagine behind me, the stairwell would go up, and there's this little door under the stairwell. So that's what she opened, and she says it's going to lead to the basement, and the room that would have led those that were traveling the Underground Railroad down the hill to the creek and across, she had converted to a wine cellar for her husband. So it's been modernized, to the extent that, so we opened that door, and it was really nice. They still had the stone walls, there was the wet bar, there was the wine, and there was that red door. So I had to ask, like, is that the door? She says, yeah, that's the door. So literally, if we were to open the door, it would have been underground, and there was a tunnel that would have led down to the Ridley Creek, maybe? Is that it? Anybody know Delaware County that well? I think that's Ridley Creek right there in Rose Valley. Or Crum? Okay, I don't know. But it's one of the creeks. Tim McGraw had formerly lived in that house, and he had raised his kids there. And apparently they had filled in the tunnel for fear that the kids would go out and it would collapse on them. So, we couldn't go all the way. But it really was kind of confirming for me why I was feeling that feeling, not knowing what it was. But it was those ancestors just speaking, and that's how I just concluded that's what I was going through. Fascinating, feeling, knowing maybe that something was up, and then seeing that history was really eerie. I'm really fascinated to see what you have to say about underground railroads in Chester. Some of us have witnessed the fact that some of the buildings right here on Avenue of the States have tunnels that run under them, and the question has always been, was it escape route for the gangsters? Was it part of the Underground Railroad? I'm hoping to get some of those answers tonight. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the answers to all my questions from Mr. Yusef Miller.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Most of you know me, but for those who don't, my name is Yusef Miller. Born and raised here in Chester, Pennsylvania, just like everyone just heard. But I'm here today to speak mostly about Chester's Underground Railroad. Now, as was said earlier, the Underground Railroad is mentioned in Chester County, in Delaware itself, in Philadelphia, in media, a lot of places. But Chester does not have a real record of the Underground Railroad here. So I'm going to talk now. I didn't know that these would be so far from you, so please forgive me about these images. But that image, there we go. That image is of the Underground Railroad. And if you look in the empty white part, that's where we are. It's Delaware, Chester County, and around to Philly. Now, when I first saw that picture, I was like, no way. Absolutely not, because I learned at school the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. I learned that in school, so I said, no way that makes sense. So I started studying. I started asking around Delaware County to all the experts. I went to Widener, I went to Temple, I went to so many places around, the experts, the archives, and they were like, well, nothing really happened in Chester. I was like, well, that seems impossible to me, so I'm gonna look. So I started looking. And as I looked through, I started uncovering a sentence here, a sentence there, a name here, a name there, an event here. Putting them all together painted a picture, and I hope to paint that picture for you today. And I'll paint the picture by starting off with something that is not in the timeline that we're supposed to talk about, but is very important. I couldn't wait to tell you this part, so I moved it up, even though the timeline is off. This is Anna Maria Williams. She was enslaved in Maryland, then to DC, and she escaped. There's a book named about her story. Sorry, go one more. There's a book about her story called Stealing Freedom. Stealing Freedom is her escape route from DC to Philadelphia. Now, of course, she came through here. Now, she was a young woman, and there was a doctor that went to visit her, He rode his horse carriage there, and when he got there, he dressed her up as a male and said that he was her driver. And they drove from D.C. all the way back to Philly for her savior. So the reason why I'm bringing this up, the person who went to see her was a doctor that lived in Chester. A doctor that lived in Chester, one of our white brothers, went down there to help her. His name was Dr. Elwood Harvey. Dr. Elwood Harvey. Now go back one. This is Dr. Elwood Harvey, and this is his horse, Lucifer. He was a race horse. He raced horses in Chester, and he betted on horses. He is one of the first doctors that opened a women's school of medicine in Philadelphia, and he came to Chester, Pennsylvania to live. And you would wonder, why did he go from Philadelphia to Chester? And we're going to explore that. When he came to Chester, he had 2 offices. He had many offices, and he would see work out of them, and some he would live. But he needed a place to hold his horses. So he had to get a barn. He got a barn and a stable. That barn and stable was on the 4th Avenue, Market Street. Where is that? Right here. In that site, people would escape to and receive food and nourishment and clothing from Dr. Elwood Harvey's family. Now, his wife couldn't take the food out to them. He had to do it because it was against the law. It was against the law, and he didn't want his wife to get caught up in legal issues. So he took it out to her. But they didn't take it out to the 1st floor. Where were they? They were in the hayloft of the stable. Where's the hayloft? The 2nd floor. So you here today are in the Underground Railroad site, sitting in the actual space where our ancestors were seeking freedom. So not only is this building a site of government for the city, it is an Underground Railroad site of freedom for our people through Chester. So I wanted to give that first because it's a grounding issue. So as the mayor was talking about, we're sitting along our ancestors and their spirits and their vibrations and the things that have gone through. Where you're sitting here is where they ate, where they slept, and where they lived until they moved on to the next station. Next one. Now here is one of the records after he died. And I'm sorry you can't read it. I can barely read it from here, but I know what it says. It's talking about the position of his stable, and that he used to take care of them on the 2nd floor on the loft, and that he was afraid that his wife would get in trouble. When did they post this? Right after he died. They put this in his obituary. There's several obituaries, but because they're from the 1800s, they're hard to see on the newspapers. They're hard to see. So I chose from the book, from this manual, to show it because it's easier to see if you're closer up on it. Now, another thing about Dr. Harvey is that he continued doing this for a very long time. He died in 1889. So that was not long after the Underground Railroad and after the Civil War, which ended in 1865. And that, of course, just so you know, June 19th, 1865, so he kept on going until then. He lived a little while longer, then he died. When he died, they published what he did because what he did at the time was still against the law. He had still broken the law. So, one more. We're going to be talking about 2 main figures. Everything that's happening in Chester is sandwiched between 2 main figures. These main figures. One, I'm going to start south and go north. One is our white brother there. His name is Thomas Garrett. He was in Delaware. He's actually originally from Darby, but he moved to Wilmington, Delaware, and he was helping escape fugitives from slavery to escape north. Now, Harriet Tubman frequented his house. They were good friends. And she would rest there. She would get money, clothes, and all the people that she would bring, they would get money, clothes, rest, and he would finance them to go further. And he did it several ways. And the African-American brother, or the person of African descent, I like to say at this period of time, a person of African descent is William Still. William Still. He was in Philadelphia, and he was a tower abolitionist in Philadelphia. These 2 are communicating. Philly, Delaware, and they're sending people back and forth, Philly, Delaware, and sending correspondence back and forth. In the middle is us. So what's going on? People studied Wilmington. I mean, there's plaques to Garrett. There's books about Garrett. There's books about Still. This book about the friendship between Garrett and Still. But what did Garrett and Still say about Chester? What was going on in Chester? There's precious little, but it paints a picture anyway. This one you can't see is a letter. It's an original document, but it's been reprinted because it's hard to see those original documents. This one is 1858. In 1858, Thomas Garrett is writing to William Still, and he's telling him, I'm sending some people your way, and I'm sending them by boat to Chester. He mentions Chester specifically. I'm sending them by boat to Chester on their route to Media. So now we're developing a line. From Delaware to Philly, we already understand. Now we have evidence of from Delaware to Chester, then straight out to Media, where there was a lot of safe haven. And there was a lot of free black communities there. Our Quaker communities are out there as well. And it was a huge black population. And speaking of huge black populations and free black populations, one of our guests here, my brother and fellow researcher, Sam Lemon, who's here now, he wrote a book. He's from Media. And his family, his grandmother wrote this, his grandmother told him stories. He compiled this book, Go Stand Upon the Rock, about how his family made it from freedom to freedom into Media. So please get that book and read about it. All of that is connected to Chester, and we're going to hear more about it. In Media as well, we're talking about going from Chester to Media. But how? Of course, some people had to foot. They had to foot it. They had to walk. Some people had to go across the creeks. They had to go to Ridley Creek. They had to go through Chester Creek. And those two creeks are on the side of the port. And they both go inward, westward, in that direction. So, but also, along the Market Street, Edgemont Avenue, Providence Avenue Road was a stagecoach, a horse and carriage that went daily, multiple times a day, from Media to Chester. Media to Chester, back and forth. Why? Because a lot of the lawyers had to go from Media, where we had our official documents and stuff, to Chester, and Chester was the hub of finance. It was the hub of commercial down here at the wharf of Chester on the coast. So they would go back and forth. In this picture that you can't see well, there's several stables, several coaches in the stable and horses, and that's where they took off from. Next one. And they took off from 311 West Baltimore Avenue, which is still there today in Media. So if you ever want to start connecting some dots and start going and seeing the routes that they took, you will be amazed. Now, what I suggested, and I have been suggesting for a while, that now that we know that Dr. Elwood Harvey and his barn and his stable was here on this site, I suggest that we make a movement to get a plaque right out here in front of City Hall, that not only is it our seat of government, but a seat of freedom for African Americans, that we get a heritage plaque right out front. Second idea, we should have some kind of either painting or line that goes from this building straight out to Widener, because that is the route they took. It is the actual Underground Railroad route. When you go up or down Market Street, Edgemont Avenue, Providence Avenue, you're actually on an Underground Railroad route. I think once a year, we should have a fun run, walk, for the rest of us, run, walk, that distance, in honor of our ancestors in their liberation, their fight for liberation. So these are some ideas that I'm throwing around for Chester, and I would like to see those come to fruition. Here's another letter from Thomas Garrett to William Still. He's talking about sending people, again, and in these two letters that he wrote in 1858, he mentions something else that's really interesting. By car. Now, there were no cars, so what was he talking about? He was actually talking about railroad cars. So all over the world, when you hear about Underground Railroad, they say it's neither a railroad or underground. But in Chester, it is actually a railroad. It's a railroad here as well. And up to Philadelphia, it's a railroad as well. And in Jersey, it's a railroad as well. So they did travel by rail. We have from this first primary source that they did travel by railroad car. And actually, Harriet Tubman also is said to have traveled by railroad car, and Frederick Douglass by railroad car. So we may have, I haven't found the primary source yet, but we may have been, I know already that we have been the ushers, Harriet Tubman through Chester. We've been the ushers that send Frederick Douglass through Chester. By the way, Frederick Douglass, the greatest American who ever lived, in my opinion. So we have sent them through this way. Now, I haven't found the first primary document source yet, but there are breadcrumbs that lead us into this. Now, what else is going on in Chester, right here in downtown? What else is going on? Asbury AME Church. Now, when you see AME, African Methodist Episcopal, you know that they were involved in the Underground Railroad, especially at that time. The African Methodist Episcopal were involved in the freedom of African Americans. And Asbury Church was not where it is now. It was down here. Asbury Church was on 2nd and Market. So right behind us. I don't know which way we're facing right now, but it was right behind us. 2nd and Market is Asbury Church. Now, Asbury Church is known for helping enslaved people escape. So now we have this place. We have a block behind us, Asbury Church. Then over on 2nd and Welsh, right over, is Union AME. Union AME. Union AME is founded by an ex-slave. He came here to Chester. He started this church. And in his church, we know he was up to good work. He was in good trouble, right? In Chester, Pennsylvania, we already see what's going on here with Elwood Harvey. We see what's going on at Asbury Church. We see what's going on in our Quakers one block that way, right? On the corner of 5th and Market. We see this little pattern showing up right here. It's not by accident. Asbury Church was commissioned and sponsored by a man named Stephen Smith. And I'm going to come back to him in a second. The money to start Asbury Church was by a man called Stephen Smith from Philadelphia. So back to Union for a second. Union had a pastor there. You know, when they always start, they have a pastor. Sometimes they're itinerant. And his name was also Smith. His name was Stephen Smith. Now, the railroad, this is the article that was written about the anti-slavery in the rails. The brother on my far right, he is Stephen Smith. He is a very, very wealthy African-American in the time antebellum period. Before the Civil War, he was extremely wealthy. And the African-American next to him, William Whipper, was also a very wealthy African-American in Philly. So why am I talking about them in Philly? Because they were both train owners. They owned train cars. They were known for smuggling people of African descent from York, PA to Philadelphia. And I'm still looking for the primary sources that they used their trains also to come on our rail that comes past Chester. And it says here a little bit more information about them, that their plight to get to Philadelphia. They had railroad cars I highlighted. William Goodridge was also one of them. He began in York, Pennsylvania. Smith, Whipper, and Goodridge used their resources to transport people fleeing from slavery, mostly from Maryland and Virginia, south of us. And we talked about AME, the AME Church, and they had a pastor, a reverend by the name of Smith. And we're going to talk about Smith now. This is a letter from Sharon Hill. It wasn't called Sharon Hill back then. It was called Sharon. It wasn't Sharon Hill. The place is called Sharon. And in Sharon, there was an all-girls school. It was a female school. Now, what it's saying on here, you probably can't read it. It says, I'll read it for you. It says, Chester, they had a valiant friend in Samuel Smith. Samuel Smith is his name. A colored Methodist preacher who almost invariably piloted them to Sharon, where he announced his arrival in the night by dropping pebbles. He was throwing pebbles on the roof of just below the chamber window. And then it goes on to say, we also had the most efficient helper in William Brown, a colored quarryman who had lost his leg in a premature explosion. He walked on a wooden stump, so he had a peg leg, and he withdrew and was more effective than any man that had sound limits. Now, this is talking about these two conductors on the Underground Railroad from Chester. We have William Brown, and we have Mr. Smith, Reverend Smith. And when I started looking and researching, where is Reverend Smith? They said he's a colored Methodist reverend. So when I looked in the AMEs and I looked in Union, there was their first Reverend, Stephen Smith. So we don't only have routes, we have names of sites, we have names of conductors on the Underground Railroad in Chester and from Chester. And what they did is they would put people in the carriages, they would ride them all the way up to Sharon, throw the rocks, they would let them in, and they would come back and collect more people. They did it back and forth from Chester. So I started looking into William Brown. I really wanted to know more about William Brown. I'm talking about a book. It's a peg-legged Underground Railroad conductor. I think that would be a great book. This is the Delaware County Republican. Now, Republican at that time in the 1800s was a liberal party for freedom and anti-slavery. So don't get confused by that. And this is in Chester, Friday, October 20th, and this is 1847. This is the newspaper. The way the newspapers were, they were like scrolls. They were long scrolls because I can't get the whole newspaper in a single shot. So I decided to do it this way so it'd be easier to see. So this is the periodical we're talking about, the Delaware County Republican in 1847. In that, go one more, please. One more. Okay. In that article, it says, a worthy colored man in the employ of John M. Sharpless of Chester Township had his leg awfully crushed by broken this last week by a stone thrown from a quarry by a blast. He was taken to the hospital in Philly, and he had his leg amputated just below the knee. This is William Brown. This is William Brown. And here's the thing. When you're looking for Underground Railroad information, you have to look for breadcrumbs. Things are not going to be laid out for you. It is work. You have to look for breadcrumbs. So now I'm saying, then who is John Sharpless? Because in 1847, he saved this black man's life by driving him all the way to Philly. It's not like you just hop on a 95. He put him in a carriage, he saved his life, he bandaged him up, he got him to Philadelphia and saved his life. And later, he is an Underground Railroad operator and conductor. He was probably one before that. I just don't have the first-hand document yet. But he was probably one before that. But here is the origin of his peg leg. I tried to go to Philadelphia to their hospital, and I asked them, you know, I'm looking for this man. Can you help me? Give him the years and times and stuff. They're looking through their archives. I haven't heard anything yet, but hopefully they're still doing it. So I don't have anything else. I'm still working on William Brown, and we will get more information on him. But now I'm curious about Sharpless. Who is John Sharpless? Who is the Sharpless family? The Sharpless family is one of the wealthiest families in Chester and Delaware County. One of the wealthiest. And they own huge properties. They own huge houses. The quarry that blew up belonged to Sharpless and his family. They dug up rocks so we could build all these buildings from those rocks and stuff like that. Do you see in those old buildings? They came from these quarries. He was also rich because he developed a dye in a particular clothing dye. And that also got him rich. So I'm asking, who is this guy and what are they doing? Because there's no other evidence besides this that he worked with somebody from the Underground Railroad, but it is a breadcrumb to look in that area. Next breadcrumb. I was going up 24th Street. I was invited to look at a house, and it was off Chestnut. And we went to the basement. You know, people tell you and they say, okay, there's an Underground Railroad site here. There's an Underground Railroad. So I went and see. I tracked down all myths. Even if it's just some story, I track them all down. Because then when you check them off your list, you can narrow it down to the real stuff. So I went to this site, and we went to the basement, My sister, Samira, my navigator. She's my navigator. When I'm in town doing my research, she's the one driving me around and stuff like this. But I was going here by myself. And she said, don't go by yourself. You're going to Underground Railroad in somebody's basement, you know, silence the lamp. She's saying all this kind of stuff, right? So she was like, don't go down there. I'm like, I'm going down there. She's like, wait till I get off work. I'm like, I can't wait. I was excited. So I went down there. And what I saw was, right by the kitchen is this tunnel. Now, you might not be able to recognize it, but you see a parallel wooden slab at the top and a slab down at the bottom, and there's a hole going forward after the cinder blocks. Can you guys see that pretty clearly? That is the entrance. Then there used to be a door there, a wooden door. It's only knee high. It's only knee high. Next. This is what you look at when you peek your head in. This goes under the house and out. Now, Samir, cover your ears. I was going to go in there. Samir, but as I looked down and I said, oh, I got to get in there, you know? My people went through there. I got to get in there. And I heard my sister, you better go. So I didn't go. So I took pictures. I took good pictures. I was really brokenhearted. I took big pictures. But at the back of it, it's not finished. It's not finished being excavated because he ran out of money. He couldn't finish excavating. So it goes farther. But in that direction, in the direction of this tunnel, is Chester Creek. Chester Creek. Now, the beginning of that tunnel where you saw the cinder blocks is at the edge of the house. You can see the edge of the house here. And underneath the tunnel goes into the yard. There's nothing there. I walked it, how far out I thought that the tunnel went. There's nothing there. It keeps going. So my next project is, the project that I'm currently working on, is to look at older maps and see if what I anticipate finding is a fake well or a fake barn or something like that as a sign. Now, what is the hypothesis is? It's the idea that when people are on Ridley Creek or Chester Creek and it's too hot along the roads to travel for freedom, they say, okay, follow Chester Creek until you see X, whether it's a well or it's a barn or it's something else. When you see that well, maybe it's a red well, maybe it's one with a butterfly on it, whatever it is, stop there, crawl in there, and you will find safety, food, clothing, shelter, rest. And it's right along the creek. Next. Now, this house I was invited to, this visit here. That first house was a couple visits ago. This house here, down in the corner, like if you look in the door, down on the corner, there's a square spot there that's been sealed up. That's the entrance to their tunnel. This is over there on 24th Street, 25th Street. Next. The family, this is the family when they first discovered the tunnel. Black and white picture, probably a Polaroid, I don't know. But I don't know who's in the family, so I'm not going to list them off. Next slide. This, go one back. This there. This is the actual tunnel that he's crawling through. And it goes all the way down to Ridley Creek. Now, like the mayor was saying earlier, that the people, these tunnels are so old, they sealed them up. They didn't want their kids going in there. They didn't want animals going in there. And this one actually came up in a well. When it comes up in a well. And they sealed that too. Next one. Go back. That's the entrance, and yeah, I think we could stop here. So we see now we have this house. Well, I'm not sure who originally owned this house where we see the tunnel with the guy crawling, but it's on Ridley Creek. And we see the other house that had the tunnel in it on Chester Creek. It fit the hypothesis that I had that they probably used that creek to navigate when it was hot on the roads or on the rails, because they knew that's the way they were coming. Now, the house on Chester Creek was built and owned by the Sharpless family. And this house on 24th Street may be as well, but I'm still looking into the deeds and all those kind of things. So it gives me more evidence that the Sharpless family was involved in Underground Railroad activity. It was illegal, and they would fine you out of existence. They would give you fines that'll just make you bankrupt. They caught Mr. Garrett in Delaware. They caught him. Took him to court. They fined him something that was probably equivalent to $500,000 today. And the judge said, and I better not see you back in here again. You better stop doing this activity. And as he was walking out the door, he said, I'll see you next time. So he was down. Like a lot of people think that we don't have friends. We have friends. He was a Quaker as well. So they would find you out of existence. So we have the Sharpless family. I have not found the actual written record yet, but I'm sure because of the breadcrumbs that I found. Now, I talked about Union on 2nd and Walsh, and I talked about Asbury on 2nd and Market, and I talked about Harvey on 4th and Market, and the Quakers on 5th and Market. And you see a pattern here, right? This whole downtown area was abolitionists down here. And I call it Freedom Square, because after they get off the boat, they come into this area. There's all these people that will help them, and then usher them down Market Street, down to Edgemont and out to Providence. There were all kinds of people there. But all of the people I've mentioned were males. All that I mentioned were males. Now we know there's absolutely no way that the sisters wasn't involved. Of course, the sisters were getting down. As a matter of fact, not only do we have the Harriet Tubmans, we have what's called in Chester the Tent Sisters. If you ever heard of Tent Sisters, we have the Tent Sisters. And there were many Tent Sisters in Chester. And the thing about the Tent Sisters is they knew how to keep a secret. You know, they knew how to keep a secret. The punishment for African Americans was if you were a slave, it could be death or enslavement again. If you were freed, the punishment is enslavement. So they was good at keeping a secret. In this book here, it lists some of the tents that were here in Chester, and they mostly met on Flower Street. But here on 5th and Market, there was one tent that met up here, and it was the Naomi tent. Naomi tent met over town. But I would like to do an exercise, and I can't really read it from here, so forgive me as I turn. I would like you guys to repeat after me when I say this, okay? Naomi tent. Beulah tent. Sterling tent. Hannah tent. Queen Esther tent. Smith tent. Valentine tent. We need to say these names. We need to say these sister organizations. We are doing nothing without our sisters hand in hand walking in this fight. It has never happened, and it will never happen. We cannot be successful without our sisters also recognized in the fight. They're going to fight anyway, whether we recognize them or not. But that is inhumane, it is ridiculous, and it should never happen. So here are our sisters. Now, when you think of Tent Sisters, the way I think about it is we have our Harriet Tubmans. Now we have groups of Harriet Tubmans. Groups. So we have all of these tents. I counted seven tents. That's just the ones that we know about in Chester. They have Tent Sisters in Philadelphia. They have Tent Sisters other places. And it has kind of died down a little. One thing we need to do is revive Tent Sisters. Revive Tent Sisters, cultural heritage and things of this nature. So my beloved colleague and friend, Twyla Simpkins, who's sitting here now, and my co-awardee, she is big on the Tent Sisters and actually reviving the contributions of our sisters in Chester, Pennsylvania, and everywhere. So please never forget, and if you don't know, please look up the Tent Sisters. So Naomi Tent was here as well. Now you can see that pattern right here in the hub. It is a hub. So when other later scholars started saying, like the late Nancy Webster, she was a Quaker researcher, and she used to write and talk about the Underground Railroad here in this area. And she said a statement in one of her articles. If you can go forward, I don't know if I have it there yet. No, not yet, so you can go back. So she said that Chester was a hub of abolitionist activity, and Harriet Tubman herself stopped through several times. I can't prove it. Only she said it. And you can't do research that way. You can't do it that way. So, but I believe it. Look at all we've talked about so far. And I'm not even done. I still got some stuff to talk about. We have not even scratched the surface, so I believe her. So when I came here, I was asking her, I need to talk to you. Can I talk to you? Can I speak with you? And she was very ill during those years. And unfortunately, I missed my opportunity. God had called her home. But her research papers have been given to some of the sites, the Leeper House and things like that. And I'm going to look through her records and see if I can see where she actually said that from, if it coincides with what I do. So next slide. There are a lot of places that were surrounding Chester, because we can say all kinds of good things about ourselves, and I will. We can say all kinds of good things about Chester. We can. But what were people saying about Chester? Here we're in Concord Township. You know Concord Township is going out there, Ashton and all that. So next slide, please. Now, again, I didn't think it would be this small, it would be this high. But this is the Civil War era in Concord. And in that, thank you. In that, they said the Underground Railroad system provided housing, food, shelter, and transportation for those slaves trying to escape their bondage. In Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia area was one of the centers for way stations for escaping slaves, and the city of Chester. So here we are, we have Concord talking about how they send people in our direction. Next slide. Now this one, the Underground Railroad in Marple Township, it talks about the Quakers in Swarthmore, in Media. It talks about Haverford Township. And at the end, if you could make that the bottom paragraph a little bigger. At the end, the Honeycomb AME, here we go with AMEs again, right? Out in Lama. The Honeycomb AME was built in 1852 and was headed by Reverend Hildebrand. Some of the early members of the church were slaves who escaped on the Underground Railroad, escaped on the railroad. They and the other members participated in assisting fugitives who crossed their paths, most of whom were using their route from Delaware to pass on to Chester and Philadelphia. Go on. And here's another one. In Carlisle was also a community that had abolitionists. And matter of fact, you'll see at the top there it says they have black juvenile anti-slavery societies. So even our black youth were participating and contributing to the fight. And while they lived in Carlisle communities, John Peck and free blacks who owned barbershops served as agents on the Underground Railroad. I love that part. You know how we go to barbers and people, you sit in barbers. I don't have any hair anymore, but when people used to sit at barbers and they used to talk to barbers and get into your life, they're the therapists. Yes, that's traditional. They were also the agents on the Underground Railroad. When you came for your haircut, they tell you who was going, cutting your hair, they're telling you who's going next and what's going on, what time, and all this kind of stuff, and then you go. And the next person comes in. And they update you on the Underground Railroad at the barbershop. At the barbershop. Scroll down some. Thank you. Runaway slaves passed constantly through Carlisle. They were sent to station masters in Harrisburg, Lancaster, Chester, and Philadelphia communities where they receive additional aid. So here we are in Carlisle, they're talking about how Chester is a hub and a center. Frederick Douglass, like I said, Frederick Douglass is known, his first escape, he used the railroad to escape, the actual railroad that they say, you know, they're right. The Underground Railroad is not a railroad, but sometimes it was, okay? So, in his book, My Bondage, My Freedom, he discusses his escape. And he talks about how he caught a train in Delaware, and he caught that train to Philly. He caught the train from Delaware to Philly. It was the Pennsylvania, Washington, Baltimore Railway, the PW&B. And Harriet Tubman, we believe, also. As a matter of fact, there was a movie called Black Moses with Cicely Tyson. It's an old movie. In that movie, if you ever look at it again, in that movie, I missed it, a lot of us missed it. She was sending somebody out of Delaware, and she stopped. And she said, up there, you're going to catch a train at Chester. In the movie. In the movie. Now, I wanted to contact the people who made the movie and say, where did you get that reference from? Because that's not good scholarship. I can't say, and the movie said it too. It's not good scholarship. So I haven't been able to see what their reference was. But way back when Cicely Tyson played that role, they also mentioned Chester. And Jersey. Now, before I get into Jersey, I wanted to go back to, and I think I might have missed a slide, where our first railroad train station in Chester was the same one we have here over town. So when William Thomas Garrett sent them by train to Chester, he sent them to that train station that all of us have been through. Me and Tony and Bill been on that train going up to Philly when we shouldn't have been, and going other places that we shouldn't have been. We did it on that train. And that train is the PWB Railroad. And Frederick Douglass caught the PWB Railroad to Philly, which means he came through Chester. We ushered him through. And I'm trying to find where he actually stopped and got off and mixed with his peeps here. But I'm still working on that. So I just wanted to make that notice. Next. So I was looking in Jersey. Now, this is the Delaware River. I had to zoom in on it because it's a weird-looking map that's really long instead of square. So one side is Jersey, the bottom side, and the upper side is Pennsylvania. And in the direct line, you can't see it there, but there's a line on the other side. Chester City is right there. And across from that, directly across, is where you run into Swedesboro, Logan, and those kind of areas. Directly across. If you could just walk across, that's where you would go if you could walk across. But you can't. Go. The next one, please. But in 1856, you could walk. Because that was the coldest year in record at that time. The Delaware River froze solid. Now, these people ice skating, they're ice skating in Philly that year. They're ice skating, having fun on the Delaware. Horses are going across the Delaware. Carriages are going across the Delaware with supplies. It froze thick. It wasn't just chunks. It froze thick and solid. And people were going across. My hypothesis is that people were going from Chester to Jersey during that time. Now, next slide, please. In the Jersey side, in the archives, they mention that even when it was water, that there was ferries that ran the Delaware River in that bay with stops in Chester, Wilmington, and Newcastle. So we know that they were going from our wharf over to Jersey. They were doing that frequently. But with this, I think people could walk on their own. If you go by ferry, you got to pay. Most enslaved people can't pay. They're doing it by, they're roughing it. Next slide, please. And when you get over that side, you'll see that Cooper's Ferry, which is the name of a town, and Kangton and Feddersville, they were early black communities, free black communities over there. And in 1828, the three combined and became what we know as Camden today. Those three black free communities combined, and they became Camden. So I hypothesize that our people came from Chester and went through Jersey as well. So now we have an underground railroad by ice to Jersey. I don't know if they have others by ice, but I'm just saying, hey, I never heard of one by ice yet. No, Ohio, they freeze and stuff like that. But I love this story. Next one. Across there is the Mount Zion, AME. Mount Zion. And it says right there that it's a site on the Underground Railroad. This is in Swedesboro, right next to Swedesboro, right across the river from us. Next slide, please. And that's a picture of the church. Next slide. This is the Mortenson Van Leer cabin, still in Swedesboro. Swedesboro is because there were Swedes that went over there. And the Swedes, a lot of Swedes were Quakers. They were Quakers. So it tracks, right? It makes sense. But here's the connection. Once I found this over in the Delaware side, going through their archives, going through their libraries, once I found this on the Delaware side, I realized the Van Leer family also was in Lama. So they were on both sides of the Delaware. So they were doing business going across. In Lama, in Middletown, the Van Leer family sold plots of land to African Americans who were escaping slavery. And they made a free black town by the charity, but not necessarily charity, he just allowed them to buy it, and they bought it with their money. But by this interaction, a black town in Media, black towns in Lama and Middletown sprung up. This is one of their cabins, which is noted as a stop on the Underground Railroad on the other side of the river in Swedesboro. So I haven't found any first-hand documents of them talking about the work, but the breadcrumbs are there. So when you see that the ice road froze, there was a lot of walking back and forth, and there's people going to ferries back and forth, that the Underground Railroad did go from Chester across the river as well. Next slide, please. And this tells you more about it. a lot of these names, like Raccoon River, it was noted for being a black town, and they named it Raccoon. Sometimes they named it Coonsville. You know, these things like that nature, because it related to black people and in their language back then. That's what they did. And the Van Leer cabin is historic, as it says there, and Gloucester County is also close, right across when you go across Gloucester County and Swedesboro. And so I just wanted to give you that little tidbit there as well. Next slide. Now, go back. No, go to this map and make it big again. This is the map that started my journey. Like I said, when I saw the empty space in Chester, I said, no way, that's impossible. People have not been looking at it. And it's not because I'm smart. It's not because I'm clever. It's only because I love Chester. That's the only thing people have asked me. Well, how come you found all this stuff? You uncovered all this stuff. You know, I'm like, no, it's not my credit. It's from my heart. I love my city. So then I decided to freehand fix that map. Next slide, please. Now, there you go. Now it looks better. You know, all these lines going, one going straight back towards Media, one going across the river to Swedesboro and Gloucester, and one a railroad track going from Wilmington to Philadelphia. One is a road, a foot road. You know, we have the 291, you know, going from south to north and north to south. And we have 9th Street, which is King's Highway, Old King's Highway, they used to call it, going north to south. We have, like I said earlier, we have Market Street that goes into Edgemont, that goes up to Providence. And also on both sides of the spectrum, you'll see the Chester River and the Chester Creek and the Ridley Creek. Now, don't be confused. The way that those creeks are now, they're small. But back in the 1800s, they were wide rivers. You could take bigger boats down there. So, you know, sometimes they sailed by boat. So that's a more proper map of the Underground Railroad in this area. And I plan to make a more official one when I get time. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. I want to thank you for your attention. Hopefully you learned something and hopefully inspired you to look into more of it. I'm here annually. I come back, when I come back to visit my family, I do more research every time I come back. And this information will be turned into a book. And that book will be made available to our youth so they can know and have some pride. And also, that will be the first volume. The second volume will be after the Civil War, under Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement, up until the late 80s, maybe 90s, because that's the only time I was here. Like, I left after 24 years, went to the military, served in the military for 24 years, and I retired in California. So I live there now with my family, and I come back here to visit my hometown. So thank you, and I'd like to open it up for any questions if you have any questions. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. I saw this hand first. Oh, we have a microphone.
Where are some of the other areas for your research? Because I do know that the Historical Library out there in Swarthmore has a great deal of information. It has Chester and its beginnings, Swarthmore's beginning, Media's beginning, and have you researched there to see if you could find any connections to group those different areas together to fill your picture more?
Absolutely, I have. I go there all the time. I'm friends with that Friends Library there. And I've also been to Bloxon Library at Temple. I've been to many archives in many different places. And not only in the official archives, I also go to the libraries, even if they don't say that they're an archive place. Go to the libraries. They have old books. When I see books ready to fall apart, I get excited. So I go to those libraries as well and the historical societies of those areas. So yes, ma'am, I have. And as a matter of fact, I've also invited Temple, and I've also went to Widener as well. My nephew goes to Widener, and I've been going to their library as well. And I want to thank my nephew for always being my resource guy when I come here and helping me out with everything whenever I come here and being available. So yes, I've been to those archives, yes ma'am. And in Jersey as well. And Delaware as well.
Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. So I was wondering if you could give us some context about the safety of stopping in Chester and maybe some kind of like timeline, talk about maybe this, the Fugitive Slave Act, and just kind of maybe if you had a feel for what it was like to stop in Chester, why people kept going, that kind of thing. Thank you.
Yes, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was a betrayal. That's how the North saw it, and the abolitionists saw it, was a betrayal. It was asking people of the North who don't agree with slavery to participate in returning enslaved peoples to their masters, and they hated it. That's why when that was enacted, not only from Pennsylvania, but also from Jersey and New York, and everybody started going north to Canada. This is with the impact of that. But here in Chester, people started, I believe, I haven't found it yet, but I believe it was being over-policed. That's why we see so many routes needed to be happening. Because sometimes the road to media was hot. You can't take it. Because the consequence is not just getting a fine, you're going back to slavery. And you're going to be whipped and punished. So they had to take another route, the creek. Or they had to go on the train route. Or they had to keep varying it. So it was very difficult. In Charles Blockson's book, he has a paragraph, small paragraph on Chester, and everywhere has him only a sentence. You know, I have tons and stacks of books on books on books on books, and I might get of all of those books, maybe only a paragraph's worth. So, this is what was going on. But Bloxton, in his paragraph on Chester, he said that, and this is an amazing story, in 1857, I believe, or maybe 47, there were some people escaping slavery in the South, and they were running north. And they were being chased by slave catchers. They stopped in Chester. They turned around and they beat those enslavers down, beat them up right in Chester, sent them running back to the South, you know? So it was really hazardous. You had to fight, literally fight for your life. So it was difficult to have children. It's difficult if you're not well, you know, because you don't want to get everybody caught, you know, as you're traveling. So it was real, you had to be innovative. People went by train. When I talked about the train owners in Philly, they used to smuggle people in cargo holds with logs and things like that. You know, they made little spots for them. They also gave them clean clothes and sharp clothes so they can pretend to be a free black person, and gave them papers and things like that. They would even copy papers from other freed people. Frederick Douglass benefited from that, and Harriet Tubman benefited from that. So you had to be innovative, you know, and sometimes you just had to scrap. You had to fight. You're welcome.
I don't necessarily have a question, but I have a suggestion that you might want to check out. You know, of course, you know, I've been working for the Township of Marple for a lot of years. They actually have a building that's called the Massey House that they left original that you might want to research that's
Massey
out there.
House.
So if you forget, just call me and then I'll let you know. And if you need to talk to the right people, I know who to talk to out there in the township that they can give you some information on that.
Thank you. I follow all leads. All leads. Even the leads that might not turn out to be something is worth it because, like I said, you can check it off your list. Here's one that you all may know if you're from Chester. You all may know this lead. Belvedere. That Belvedere was the Underground Railroad site. Unfortunately, it was not. It was not. I looked into it. I researched the property. The property was built shortly after the end of the Civil War. So it was a mansion. It was a beautiful site, but it didn't turn out to be true. But here's the thing. We didn't lose everything. The house that I told you that was along Chester Creek is not far from it. So what I think happened is that the myth, kind of, the story migrated. It migrated to that building. It's a bigger building. It's a nicer building. I even went up to the lookout thing way at the top. It's very rickety. They don't let people up, but they let me up because I was doing the research, and I would suggest, please, don't go up there. Don't go up there. So I went up there, and I looked, and I took pictures because I'm not coming back. So, but it found out to be false. I really wanted it to be true, though. I really did, but it turned out to be false. So thank you for the lead. I'll track down all these. Thank you, Op. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, say it. On the Sharpest family? Thank you. Yes. Yes, absolutely. So I've talked to him, and also I went to the Quaker meeting house that's right near there. Now, although they are Orthodox Quakers, and for people, if you don't know, the Orthodox split into the Orthodox and the Hicksites over many things, but one of the things they split over is their participation in the Underground Railroad. Some of them said, no, basically, we'll leave it in God's hands, we'll focus on spirituality. And the others said, no, we're going to put our hands and feet to the work of God. So they split, and they were Hicksites and Orthodox. The Quaker, our original Chester Town Hall, meeting house, that was the Hicksites. The Hicksites were in there as well. They have their meetings on their Sundays. In the same time, it was where the mayor did his work and everything. That was Hicksite. Down on 24th Street is Orthodox. But I have a sneaky suspicion that that one was Orthodox, but they participated anyway because of what's local there. So I took some of their books. They gifted me some of their books on the Sharpless family and those that nature, who they were, their descendants, and things like that, and it's been very helpful.
Yeah, okay. But you talked to Tom Kirk at Taylor Arboretum because he has records of the Sharpless family.
The man that owns the house, I'm not
Not
right.
the house. He's
Oh, no.
He's the caretaker of the Arboretum.
I'll have to check.
Yeah.
I would like to get that contact.
He's got stuff.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Yes.
And I'd like to use this opportunity to segue. I'm a retired school teacher, and I guess it's just with me. And my research segues with Yusef's, and that's important because that's how you confirm. Now, how many of you have ever heard of Ruth Bennett and the Bennett home? If you do the research on her, you will see that many women who worked from her organizations were also members of Asbury AME Church and Union AME Church. And you look at where some of these churches were, you look at where Miss Ruth's home was, you look at the Wilson Center, and you can begin to make those kinds of connections. I did a documentary because I was curious about where my grandmother went every Thursday night dressed in black. She was a tent sister. When I started doing research on the tent sisters were founded in the mid-1800s. And they worked through Union AME Church in the city of Chester. So you can then begin to keep continuing to connect the dots so that you understand. When Yusef was listing the names of the tent sister or the tent groups, if you do your research on them, you will see that they are prominent or were prominent women in the city of Chester who could afford to support a tent group. And that's how those names came to be. And I spoke with Miss Marie Pierce, who was the last leader, she's now relocated to Florida. And she gave me documents which I've shared with Yusef. And it takes it back to some of those times. Connect all of that with Green Lawn Cemetery, my heart. Guess where they relocated Union AME Church Cemetery? In Green Lawn. So again, we have to work to make sure that we understand, we can make the connections, and we can also give those connections to our young people so that they better understand and value and appreciate it. And as Green Lawn continues to tell its story, Calvary folks are buried over here, St. Daniel's folks are over here, Asbury folks are here. When you start doing the research, it was because a lot of the women were selling plots for the funeral homes, and that's how the churches began to be, to evolve in these spaces. So it's just an ongoing, continuing information that is being brought forth. And I'm just real happy that I can hang with him when he comes this way. Are you Yusef's sister? He wouldn't let me go up that thing in Belvedere, but I was trying.
Yes, sir. Yes.
I want to know Was any of those conductors buried here in Chester?
Not that I know of. I'm still looking. Some of them actually lived in Chester for a very long time and moved. Like, let's say in 1850, a lot of people were escaping the Fugitive Slave Act, as we talked about before. Some people went on to Ohio in certain places. So their track kind of runs cold, but it's not for maybe a little bit more digging that I might find something, hopefully. So, and hopefully, a lot more will come out of it. Family members and connections, people who know people. For example, when Elwood Harvey, who had the barn here, when he died, his funeral was presided over by St. Paul's Episcopal. So then that gives you a connection. What is St. Paul's up to? If they are going to do this for a person who was prominent in fighting on the Underground Railroad. So that church and the people who've buried there and the people who have worked and toiled there, they're all like on the radar, in my opinion. They should be on all of our radars. And then all of our families have something in your garage, something in your photo album, something that has a little piece of that breadcrumb. And I ask everyone to please look into your background, look into your family history, look into your letters, and see what they're saying about your AME.
Any other questions? Comments? No complaints, right? No. That was fascinating. Let's give him a hand. Do we have the award presentation? Electronic, that works. We have electricity. Get on up here.
My name is Beth McCarrick, and I'm the Secretary of the Heritage Commission of Delaware County. The Heritage Commission is the liaison with the County Council with all things historic, the number of buildings that are owned by the county that are historic in nature, and anything that happens in the county that has to do with history. We're working now on the 300th, I can't even figure it out, 250. I had it right the first time, because I remember the bicentennial, because that was only 50 years ago. But anyway, we're working on that right now. So you might see signs for the return of Lafayette, because this is the 200th anniversary of his farewell tour of the United States that he did in 1824. So a lot of places through Chester, all over the country, there was only 24 states then, he visited them all on his farewell tour, and they're trying to reenact that. But the Heritage Commission gives awards out every March, so we start looking for nominees in January and February. So if you see somebody that's renovating a building that has historic significance, or they're doing something to make people more aware of history, Twyla has received a number of awards from the Heritage Commission, and she currently is a member on the Heritage Commission too. But we have the Leadham B. Morrison Heritage Award, and that's just for places in Chester. And Leadham B. Morrison was a former Chester city planner until 1990. He was there from 69 to 90, and then when he passed, they set this award up for him. And the Leadham, this award recognizes preservation projects in the city of Chester that involve restoration, rehabilitation, or adaptive reuse of a historical structure or any other type of project that preserves the heritage of Chester City. So this past year at our award ceremony, we gave the missing piece, Rediscovering the Underground Railroad in the City of Chester, for Yusef Miller and Twyla Simpkins of the Yes Center. And just that on our certificate, it says, frustrated by the lack of references to Chester City and other publications and stories about the Underground Railroad, Yusef Miller embarked on a long process of discovering stories and places related to Chester's place in the route to freedom. He discovered paperwork, relics, and artifacts that reference locations and people in Chester, and presented his ongoing research at the J.L. Crozier Library in August of 2023, which is available on YouTube. As part of Chester's Made Archaeology and Identity Connecting People and Things project in 2018, Some underground passages were identified by the historical archaeologist Rebecca Yaman. Information on the project and a video of the tunnels is on the Chester Made website. So we'd like to present to you this award, and Twyla has it. You can show everybody.
I had the frame, but the guy with the copy didn't show, so we're going to pull this one off anyway.
Okay. Well, congratulations.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And you
Sure there's no other questions, comments? Do you do? Sure, I'll bring it out. Hold on. I'm gonna have to get up.
Oh, thank you so much. My brother was kind enough to show the cover of my book, Go Stand Upon the Rock, and it just kind of reinforces what he says about hanging on to family stories. That's how we transfer our culture and our heritage and our history from generation to generation. And you know, when I was a kid, I spent countless hours with my grandmother, and she told me all those old stories. Her grandparents were runaway slaves from Virginia, made their way to Media, and were given refuge by Quakers at Providence Meeting. And we have an underground writing room at Providence Meeting, which was part of a one-room schoolhouse that we had built back in 1809. And a small group of fellow Quakers and I went down there back in 2017, spent some time doing some research, found some small artifacts. But it goes to what you said earlier, Mr. Mayor. The feeling that you get when you go into these sacred spaces, it's extremely powerful. It's palpable. So, you know, again, I'd just like to say that you can see by his map, Yusef has created a whole new body of knowledge, a whole new body of information that no one else has done. So he's to be greatly commended for giving this just remarkable and valuable piece of Chester history to the people of the city.
All right, so I guess it's up to me to close all this out. I can't thank you again for that magnificent presentation, for the work that you're putting in is extraordinary. And to Mr. Lemon's point, it's not only extraordinary, but it's new history. You know, sometimes we think about history and that we already know everything already, or everything's already documented, or it's in the Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay, Wikipedia. Okay, the internet. The dark web. You know, it's already out there, it's already written. But it takes passion and love and work and money and resources to dig even further. So much that you said today relates to so much that I'm experiencing as mayor and as a longtime resident here in the city of Chester. I'm thinking about some work we're doing right now, right on the 291 side across the street. There's a cemetery over there. There's a complicated deed arrangement between the city of Chester and the St. Paul's Episcopal Church with regard to that cemetery. So there's a group of people who are very into history as well. They want to save the cemetery. Well, obviously the cemetery is not going anywhere, but when it's in the possession of the city of Chester and we're responsible for cutting it, keeping it nice, we haven't done a good job, let's admit it. But then again, we're not in the business of taking care of cemeteries either. You know, we have lawnmowers that like to just run wild through parks, but to go around stones that are up and down and whatever. So the last couple of years, the cemetery has been getting some work by people who love to do that. St. Paul's has also been trying to identify everybody who's in the cemetery. Those two efforts together have uncovered hundreds of more bodies in there, and they come, as we understand, from those couple black churches that were right near here as they expanded Highway, 2nd Street into the highway. As those, churches went away, the bodies were just transferred from the plots where those original churches were, black churches, into the cemetery back there with so many others. They're unmarked graves. They've done the, what do they call it? I call it X-raying, but the penetration type stuff, and just have identified a lot of stuff back there. The most famous person buried back there is John Morton. Did I get that right? One of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. So it is a very significant historic piece. The other thing that hits home with me is the fact that, I can't forget this. Your plaque and your walking, yeah, we're gonna make that happen, all right? So let's do that. And we're gonna make that happen because it's so consistent with what we're going for right now. Justin and I work together day to day, chasing dollars that we know is available for cities like Chester. And we know that our state is very big on what they call Main Street initiatives, like bringing money into repairing, upgrading, making old business districts nice and shiny again. One of the things that we want to connect is downtown to Widener University. We are a city with a university, but have never behaved like we're a college town. So I want to end that. So all the efforts that we're doing is trying to get the blessings from the state that they're going to help us, and all signs show that they are. So the trail is just so consistent to what we want to do. Yeah, let's give the state a hand. Let's call Josh Shapiro right now. Don't let us down. And I always say that all roads lead to Chester. And it's very easy to say when you're sitting right on I-95, right off the Blue Route, you got a railroad going through, you got a river, you're 10 minutes from the airport. But all the historical trails come through Chester as well. Just across the street, you'll see a marker for George Washington. He came through here. We just talked about Lafayette. You know, when Martin Luther King went to school up the street, he was walking up and down these streets as well. We haven't done a good job of highlighting the history that we have in this town, because this is truly a tourist location town. So that's one of our objectives as well. You know, we don't have everybody come into Chester. They usually come into Philadelphia. That's our, the heart and soul of this region. But when black organizations come into town and want to learn some black history, some old American history, or some of the, the European history, all of it took place down here. And people are learning really fast that I'm that guy who wants to merge old history with new history. Old history is around here quite a bit, and all you have to do is look at the street signs. There are names of the people who built this area, from nothing to everything. So I don't know how many of you guys know Mr. Curlin or Mr. Barkley or Mr. Pennell. Maybe you know Mr. Broomall. I never met Governor Sproul. And I'm always curious who Mr. Thurlow is, or I think we've heard of Caleb Pusey but never met him. So more and more people are coming to me, and they want to put a ceremonial street sign up for the pastor of the church that's on that street. And I'm not saying no to anybody. If we can make it work, we want to make it work, because we want to make history relevant for the young people as well. Twyla and I I can say we're formerly board members of the Delaware County Historical Society. One of my missions for joining, which I wasn't too ready to do, but they twisted my arm and talked me into it, was to do just what you said. The Delaware County Historical Society doesn't have a lot of information on Chester, particularly Black Chester. So my mission, and I failed miserably because I just didn't accomplish what I wanted to do, was to do just what you said. Get the people around here to look in their basements, look in their garages, look in their treasure chests and their drawers, and bring those relics out that will be the history that we could display or demonstrate or have these lecture series on. That mission will never stop. I'm so glad that Ms. Twyla has followed me as a board member, so maybe she can make that a reality. But we have to really respect our history. You go down to D.C. at the African American Cultural Museum, the Smithsonian down there. That's how they got started. They just made that call around the country and says, what do you have? What do you have? Just bring it to us. We'll decide what's good, what's bad, what we're going to display. We can do the same thing here. So for those of you who have come out to hear this lecture, you care, so I'm glad you're here. You saw it live. We record these. We do live streams. Hold on. I'm going to ignore Miss T.
Thank you. When you get old, you get a little bit more nerve. He's talking about collecting history. The Yes Center, the former YWCA Chester. I've been at it basically by myself for 12 years. And my goal, and Charles Blockson was one of my colleagues, he told me, take your stuff to DC. I said, no, Chester deserves its own museum. And so, before they stole my pipes, and I have no heat, and I have no water, I had a traveling Black History Museum, I have a library, and I have a Black repository. And it's time that the Chester and the world knew and know. So I'm carrying on, and I'm gonna keep doing these shameless plugs, including these documentaries that I've done, including Green Lawn that I'm really fighting to survive. And I just need folks to know what I'm doing, and if you can, help. YesCenterChester.org.
I am never mad at a shameless plug. But I will say one of the things in her collection, which is amazing to me, are funeral programs, obituaries. She collects those. And through those, there's, when you weave it all together, that's where you get a lot of history and a lot of family connections, especially in a time like now, where families are really complicated now, right? There's not too many two-family, father, mother at home, aunt might raise, grandmother might raise, uncle. So a lot of times, especially young people, and I can say even myself, because of how I was raised through adoption, it's really tough for me to go back more than maybe grandma, But those are things that we have to work on. We have to preserve our history, present our history, study our history. And I am just so proud that we were able to squeeze this in. It was not a scheduled event. I think 5 days ago it was brought to our attention that you would be in town. Your delivery was amazing. You're a true professional. We have somebody we want you to meet when you go back to San Diego who's actually writing a book about Chester right now. And he's really chronicling the last 100 years of Chester political history. So I know he'll be fascinated to hear your timeline. So I'm going to close on this because all that was serious. I want you to put a line in it because I'm going to say something that's really kind of stupid right now. But a few years ago, I picked up a book because the title intrigued me. It was called, and I'll be curious if you've heard of it, Underground Airlines. Okay, so probably no one has heard of it. It's a novel, which means it's fiction. But it was pretty intriguing, and what the author was trying to present in this book was a story of what would America be like today if slavery never ended. So I'm just going to leave it at that. It's a great read. It's pretty fascinating to see what this guy's perspective of what today would be if slavery never ended. So I'm going to end on that one. I'm not selling the book. I don't get any proceeds. But if you have Audible or something like that and want to get a real interesting, entertaining read of something that intrigued me, it would be great. Is there any way that people can reach you? Do you have any social media, email? Why don't you share that today? Phone number? Anything? Snapchat?
I always stay accessible. So I'm at Yusef M. My name is Yusef. YusefM@hotmail.com. You can reach out to me anytime. And I'm also on Facebook, Yusef Miller. And I didn't know there was that many Yusef Millers, but there's too many, for my liking. But the one Yusef Miller, you'll see, I have my kufi on, I'm at the UN, and you'll see the big UN symbol behind me. That'll be me. So just click on that one. It's on Facebook. Thanks.
Well, I'm going to say good night to all. Get home safely. Anybody need to use the restrooms before you go? We can point you to that. Otherwise, our next Our next lecture is October 1st, and it is on, many of you know about the Move family in Philadelphia. Well, we're going to talk about Move in Chester. We actually had a family here, and on the day of the bombing in Philadelphia, there was some activity here in the city of Chester, and we'll be bringing in Ulysses Butch Slaughter to talk about that. That's fascinating. All right, you guys, have a great night.